think about embodiment and ecology and heritage together, embodied ecological heritage, um, each one of those constituent terms is very broad. And using those very broad terms is kind of deliberate, actually. So when we think about embodiment, we think about our lived experience in the world, and we think about our body's place in that lived experience, how we experience things in the body. Now, adding the ecology is our interactions to our environment. So it's how our body interacts directly with the environment. Now, when we put heritage on the end of that, heritage, I use it in a sense that it's not just tradition or not just the past, but it's how the past is sort of constructed in the present. And so our daily interactions with their environment and how our body experiences those actually forms heritage in a sense. It constructs heritage every day on a daily basis. So pulling those ideas from the past, from tradition, but sort of constructing them through our daily interaction with the environment in the present forms that embodied experience. So when we speak about embodied ecological heritage, that's how those constituent terms come together.
There is a very important way of we the Mayan peoples how we live and how we are related to the environment, to the land, to everything that we have. So the um, the important of it is that we shouldn't forget of the traditions that we learn from the parents, the grandparents of our parents, and then I believe that these traditions are very important to us as the Mayan people, but um, I think to continue with the tradition is that we should learn from each other, or maybe we should educate other peoples or other future childrens. The future should be educated about the traditions or the customs of the Mayan people.
Um, Nauruans don't use terms like heritage. They use words like traditional and remember what people in the past used to do. White rice, for instance, is a traditional staple food. Living for today is a traditional way of life. Remembering the ways of the past is a tricky thing, though. Much of our history is lost in the past, the head chief said in 1962. But why build canoes when you can buy powered boats? Why fish when you can import canned fish? Memories of skills are lost, and at the same time, memories recall things that never happened. Nauruans don't use words like ecological. They're not outside observers of the world around them, they're inside and they're living it. When extreme ecological changes, wealth, political independence, imported food, international travel happen over time, they're just adopted into normal everyday life. Now, an outside observer like me sees a beautiful landscape at one instant and a mined out wasteland and polluted reef the next. But for the last 100 years, Nauruans have become accustomed to the daily grumble of trucks and the occasional ship coming to take another small section of their island away. An outside observer sees that white rice only began to be imported in the 20th century. But for Nauruans, it's a traditional staple food. An outside observer sees Nauruans of the past preserving food years in advance, thinking about the future. Today, Nauruans shop for food every day. An outside observer sees a slender population one day and an obese diabetic population just 15 years later. But Nauruans haven't changed, they're still Nauruan and they're simply living life. Nauruans don't use words like embodiment, but your body matters. Too skinny and it shows that no one is taking care of you, or that you're in end stage diabetes. Too fat, and the world around you blames you for being an irresponsible burden on society. Too much sugar in your blood, and the doctor tries to control your life, tell you how to live and how to eat. Avoid too much canned food, they say. Cut down on white rice. But how can you stop eating canned food if no one remembers how to fish and if the reef is polluted? And if you stop eating white rice, then it leaves you feeling empty and unsatisfied. It is, after all, the traditional Nauruan staple food and a part of your past. Perhaps then it's better to live life for today and enjoy it rather than worry about the future.
Today I going to eat somaboy with with chipi japa. It's nice to cook it with tortilla, and when the chikai finish right now, and when I finish to cook chikai, then I fry it with onion, then I eat it with tortilla. When I finish to bake that, then we ready to eat all we all together. Then right now is rainy season. We got a chote to cook it. I going pull it first, then I going cook it. When I finish to cook it, then I will put it in the butter. Then I going sell it. Some people like to buy a chote. When the raining season right now, they got some rice to cut. Then I buy it. Then I beat it with the pilon. When I finish to beat it, then I try to cook my rice with mabui. When I finish to cook it, right now they got young beans. I going put some young beans in rainy season. Then after that, we put it in the sun. Then we beat the beans when it get and dry. After that, we have to fan it with some basket. Then we will go and sell the beans. And right now we will making some basket. We will making some basket right now to find some little bit of money with that. Then we cook the jibijapa too.
Embodied ecological heritage, embodied environmental knowledge, embodied environment. These are all really interesting concepts and I think useful in a lot of ways. I work in a small town in Belize of about 5,000 people. Many people still farm, still have connection to their past and a number of different traditions and traditional knowledge. However, we're seeing a reduction in knowledge and practice of these traditions, of these connections to that natural environment. So older people in the community, they have a relatively deep knowledge base of traditional environmental knowledge. In particular, I see this in their herbal remedies, their traditional remedies, plants that they're using from the environment for health needs. Older people know a lot, use a lot. Younger people know less and use less. And this is almost across the board. And so in this type of environment in which relationships with the natural environment are shifting, we're no longer spending time on the farm growing our own food. We're no longer in the bush looking for our medicines. We're now in town driving to the pharmacy, driving to the clinic, driving to the shop for our foods. Our relationship to the environment has changed and our environment has changed, and thus how we embody that environment has changed. For example, I can point directly to diabetes. In Belize, diabetes is the leading cause of death for over the last 5 years. We see diabetes cases continue to rise year by year since at least 2006. Hospitalizations due to diabetes continue to rise, and the people with diabetes continue to get younger. So we're seeing more cases in a younger population. Associated with this, as I said, is that change in their environment. Fewer people have that connection to the farm, to the bush, to the natural environment, and more people have a stronger and more regular relationship with a less natural environment of the city, of paved streets, of vehicles, of the office, and of going to the shop for your food, of going to the shop for your medicine. This shift in environment is shift in how healthy people are. We see a direct relationship in people's health.
When we start to chop, we chop the high bush. We chop them, we fell the trees and leave it there for a month to dry, and then we burn it, and then we have to get some people to help us, some men to help us. Well, if we got 3-4 acres, then we get maybe 10 or 15 men to help plant in half day. So that's the way we plant. So we wait until that corn start to grow for 3 months, and then we have young corn in August. Well, we used to live in the village, and we plant corn for our food, and we raise our chicken, then we raise our pigs, our local pigs. We raise our own corn, that's our food. We plant beans, rice, ground food.
So, when thinking about how embodied ecological heritage relates to public health and public policy, it's really quite interesting because it takes on two almost competing threads within public health. Well, not really competing, but two different strands of public health and two different roads you can go down that are happening at the same time. So if we're thinking about people's embodiment of traditions within the environments with which they live and how that relates to their health and well-being, in public health, in one respect, we're trying to change the ecological settings and the environments with which people live to allow them to have a richer and healthier connection to those environments. So for instance, in lots of Western and developed countries, like the UK and the US, we're working, public health is trying to encourage walking and cycling and daily activity to increase the amount of physical activity that everyone is getting, because that has a huge positive impact on long-term health. But our cultures have developed to the point where most people aren't getting any physical activity, let alone meeting sort of these requirements that have been set by our medical community. And evidence shows that you need physical activity. So in one respect, we're changing the ecological setting, and that's our goal, to change it. But on the other hand, we're also, this traditional embodiment is really quite fascinating, because when it comes to diet and nutrition, many cultures have moved away from traditional diets, and we now have very convoluted ways of obtaining the calories and extra calories that we need to get by.
I like mabu with jipa japa and the chicken. I go and find the mabu in my yard, and I feel the mabu with my mother. My mother cooked the mabu and it cooked. We start to eat the mabu with kala or chicken. When the rice was ready, me and my father went to cut the rice. when the beans was ready, we began and put the beans. When we finish put the beans, we start to pull the beans. When the corn was ready, me and my father went to take some for our mother to make it sauerkraut.
When I think about embodiment and environmental knowledge, what comes to mind based on over a decade of looking at this topic in southern Belize is that in Kekchi, the term for learning how to be in the world, how to make a living in the non-human world, is synonymous with working. So the connection between perception of the environment or local ecology and the skills that are needed to make a living in that world are intimately tied through the process of work. When you ask parents in Kekchi communities about what it is that that children do when they learn about the world around them, they talk about the fact that they send them to work to find things that they need. So whether that's sending them to find particular species of plants that are sort of semi-wild or wild resources in local forests, or to chop firewood, or whether they're looking for ammunition for slingshots to hunt birds, which is a favorite pastime of young boys. All of these things take place in the process of participating in everyday life, which is structured by what David Lancy tends to call cultural routines. And so work and practice and skill are very much intimately tied and bound to the way people experience and know their local landscapes.
I have two kids are big already, one boy and one girl. The boy is, I want to learn he learn what his father is doing. That's for him, not for me again, because I already teach them. For me, it's the girl, and I have to teach her too. Both of them, I have to show them how I go in my life. The boy, he obey me, and he obey his father what he thought about. I send them to school to learn, and not just in school. They have to learn in my house or in the plantation. Everything they have to learn. The boy is already doing a coop for the chicken, and that is the best thing to have to test already. And the girl do the tortilla, and he already touched the comal. I always tell them make the shell the corn. That's what we eat. That's our traditional for our Mayans. That's how we eat the corn. You have to shell it and you have to put it in the fire. Then it will be the tortilla when you finish with that.
American Indians, certainly indigenous people, to accept to be true. It's what we know. It's part of our origin stories. It's part of our ceremonies, part of our songs, that we're part of this land, that we are of this land, that we're in relationship with this land, and being connected to this land makes us healthy and makes us whole. In my work with urban Indians, we look a lot at historical trauma and the role that this plays in substance abuse problems. And a big part of that is the loss of land, the loss of language, the loss of agency, that sense of disconnection from who we're meant to be that really leaves us so bereft in this world, and too often try to mediate those feelings of dissonance with things that aren't good for us. Substance abuse, violence in our communities where there hadn't been
violence in certain specific ways. These are things that impact us greatly. And so with regard to embodied ecological heritage, I'm interested in the places where one is unable to enact that heritage, and what happens then. How does one deal with that type of situation? There was a quote by Luiseno artist Fritz Scholder that I really like, and what he said was that most immigrants have a homeland to which they can return, but for the American Indian person, the homeland is completely taken over by a wholly alien other. And what do we do with that? It's a very interesting conundrum. So, in medical anthropology, I'm interested in looking at the places where the impacts of historical trauma, the impacts of microaggression really impact our health and what we need to do to get back in line, to bring ourselves back to who we were meant to be, who our ancestors sacrificed for us to be. In taking those kind of restorative actions, what we do in our urban Indian community is sort of a two-pronged decolonization, retribalization approach to dealing with substance abuse issues, but also general issues of dysfunction within the community. And what I mean is decolonizing, kind of unlearning all of those behaviors that we've taken on as a colonized people that disconnect us from the land and our heritage, but then replacing that, retribalizing with all the things that were our birthright to begin with. And so while it's not perfect, it's certainly not a panacea, I think it really helps to restore a person's sense of who they are, and so they have that little bit more strength to have a foundation from which they can pursue their recovery and really reclaim their Indianness. The other part of this discussion that I think is interesting is the role of art in kind of mediating those effects of one's inability to enact their heritage. I think of artists like Fritz Scholder, of Bunky Echo Hawk, of Mohawk artists. I love him. Carrillo, I'm probably saying the name wrong, but anyway, these images that are beautiful to look at, and they harken back to these kind of very traditional symbols, that Indian people are familiar with, can interact with, but then kind of turn them on their heads, and so, they become powerful images of resistance. These days as we're talking about American Indian Heritage Month and, ironically, the native appropriation of the pseudo-rape video that no doubt thought was looking so hot. These are the images that Native people consume that, like, this is what the outside world thinks of us, and often, thinks little of us or seems to communicate that. So when we reclaim our images as Indian people, it's another means of enacting our heritage, not maybe exactly or through participation in community or in ceremonies the way that we might have, but just in a real powerful act of resistance that, to me, is something really gratifying to see. It's like an escape valve. And, I like to say that art of resistance really nourishes the people because it kind of inspires you to take your power back.
It's important to follow the Maya tradition. It's very important because some people, they move from the village, they go somewhere, maybe in town. So when they come back, they don't want to speak Maya, they speak in English. So it is important that we use our own tradition, our own Maya. That's the way we have to live. So I think that's important for the Maya people. And sometimes the ladies, if they are dressed, when they see someone dressed different, so they start to dress themselves different. That's the culture for the Maya. But we have to continue with our culture, with our tradition. we speak in Maya, Kikchi, and English. I think that's important for us to know.
During my time in Santa Cruz, I was living and working with Mopan Maya subsistence farmers and their families, and I was teaching and learning about environmental and cultural heritage. And as I was doing that, I realized that this environmental and cultural heritage is not simply for tradition's sake, it's not simply cataloging, it's not simply listing all this important information for history's sake, but this was actually important information not just for the past, but for the future. It was not only interesting and important information, but participating in these activities, these environmental and cultural heritage activities, actually made people more well. It contributed to wellness. It actually made them more healthy, broadly defined. And while I was participating, doing participant observation, which is our anthropological methodology, I was baking tortillas and things like that. And as I'm doing that, I'm hearing reports from home, from the States, from Europe, people talking about how they're participating in slow food movements and they're planting their local garden, and they're talking about transition and slow food and kind of going back to getting your food locally. And at the same time, the subsistence farmers that I'm living with and learning about their environmental cultural heritage are thinking about how they can try to earn money to send their kids to school. And it was this sort of intersection that made me realize, okay, this isn't just about the past. This isn't just about history or heritage. This is about what is important going forward into the future. And participating in these traditional practices were not simply important for keeping up history or keeping up traditions, but they were important for our daily health, and they were important as they move forward. And it doesn't mean you can't incorporate other changes, but this was sort of a critical epiphany for me.
They're here. The day is festive with live music, lots of moving bodies, local vendors, an exciting mix of fresh foods and organic goods. In this emerging community, everyone seems to know everyone else. It's hard to believe that just a few more moments on the highway drops you into downtown Tampa. At another CSA not that far away, a few days later, I try to pick a cucumber, jerking my hand back at the unexpected prick of the surprisingly rough skin. Cucumbers are thorny, I think to myself. In this work, I'm constantly reminded of how little I actually know about things I experience and consume every day. Where did you find the help? I hear an apprentice joke to the farm manager. And when is she coming back? The young apprentices here are jovial and carefree, but dedicated to their jobs. The drudgery of daily tasks is tempered by the ease in their performance, taking time to joke and laugh, communing over the chores of planting, weeding, and harvesting. A few weeks later, I had the joy of visiting a pig farm. On my farm visits, I'm usually greeted by farm dogs, with a stray cat eyeing me from a distance, swishing his tail before settling back to sleep. However, on this occasion, I'm greeted by a medium-sized piglet who sniffs my shoes as I straighten my cap and reach out to greet my latest farming friend. Here, pigs are treated as pets. They adopt the role of mischievous puppies quite well. In the pen, I try to photograph the rambunctious litter, while dirty snouts smear my camera lens. They jump in my lap as soon as I kneel down, pulling my bag and pant legs, eager to play. I quickly adopt a method of walking quickly away, then holding my camera low to the ground as the piglets come bounding towards me. I impress myself with my own creativity until I try the same trick with an older pig, a 2-month-old gilt. Her legs are as long as mine and I can't get enough distance to pull it off. Her curiosity is well-intentioned, but her 70-pound body is overwhelming. The farmer tells me to hop on a picnic table, but the pig easily climbs up to join me. She apologizes, but I laugh it off. This is just another day in the life of a food scholar, jumping in and out of the lives of farmers, hoping to capture their experiences by living an afternoon in their respective lives and all that entails. These lived experiences are embodied for me in a way that I've come to understand the back-breaking work of sustaining a community. When studying food systems from farm to fork, it's impossible to gain a full understanding without living the experience, without embodying the product. This means not only tasting the sweet fruits of the labors of others, but also participating in that labor yourself. I've not put in nearly the amount of hours a farmer dedicates to the cause of sustaining a community, but the small experience I've had, I will carry with me. More importantly, sustaining a community is the mission of these alternative food networks, where people are regaining control of their food, their bodies, and ultimately their communities. These are not only embodied experiences for me, but creating a local food system is an embodied political and social statement for the people in this movement. These local systems bring us back to a global heritage of food provisioning, in which agents for change are not only fighting for a new way of doing things, but are embodying their missions in their everyday lives, as well as a way to start a new story, perhaps not returning to a simpler life, but certainly establishing a more sustainable future.
We need to protect for our children them to come, for the future generations. Because if we just start to do damage, to destroy everything, the future generations, the future children cannot see anything like this that we have today. I can recall or I can remember that from way back, from since when I was like 5 years old, I can see the difference now, because people's now like they are trying to use chemicals. They are damaging or they're destroying the trees that serve for like 25 to 35 years. So there's whereby I think we should start to consider of a way how we can manage our environment. So if we started to destroy and use chemicals and destroy everything the trees that survive for years, I believe that in the next nearby future, I believe that it will start it to be turned it as like pasture, turned to grass and whatever things like, you know. But what I believe is that people should stop using chemicals, and chemicals is one thing that we shouldn't use, because if we use chemicals in our field, in our corn field or rice field, or in any field that we plant our crops on or in, I believe that that chemical still goes into our food. So but from way back by our grandparents doesn't use those kinds of chemicals, so that is why they are healthy, that is why they are strong, that is why they are like, you know, they can survive. But now we, the present people of today, we are like trying to abolish everything what our grandparents, the parents that we have today, we are trying like to abolish. But I believe that with educating ourselves with the elders that are still alive today, I think there is whereby we can get and learn from them. So that is the very important part of the land and the environment.
I spend quite a bit of time thinking about the relationship between personhood or subjectivity and space. And I think when I think about embodiment, I think about the constant co-production between people and their surroundings. And I think more recently I've started to extend that to thinking about the multiplicity of relationships between people and different constituent bits of their surroundings. So not just in terms of people producing space in a very materialist sense, but people producing space in terms of plants and animals and the kind of dialectical exchange between people, plants, animals, etc. When I think about ecology now, I also think about this kind of social relationship between subjects and their surroundings. And I guess for me, embodiment and heritage and ecology are all tied up in that. They're tied up in the relationship between people and plants and animals and the world that they make through their relationship with each other, but also through the relationship with the world. And I know that that sounds a little complex and muddy, but I think that's the interesting thing about these three terms. I think that they are complex and I think they're muddy. And I think that in thinking about them, I use both my experience of being an ethnographer who's worked in Papua New Guinea for many years, and then also my experience as someone who is a citizen of one of the largest cities in the world. And so when I think about embodiment, I think about the way in which one comes to be and produces and conceptualizes the world around us, both in terms of urban space and of non-urban space, what might be thought of as natural space.
To me, embodied ecological heritage, it's a tricky thing to define. But I think it makes sense when I think about Tim Ingold's definition of an organism as a nexus of relationships. This past year living on Mfingano, I can think of a few examples. One in particular was when I decided to build a small thatched house. And in order to build the roof for this house, we had to go pick up grass on the mainland, where it's cut high up on the slopes of a mountain directly opposite from the island. And so we headed across the lake on a boat, and when we reached the beach, we actually saw that the person that we'd contracted with to help us bring this grass down from the mountain was still cutting grass way up on the mountain. So we had to ask a few women in this community that were there on shore if they would hike up this mountain and help us carry down bundles of grass. It was about a 1.5 mile hike up to the spot where they were cutting the grass, and for me, I could barely load 2 of these large bundles of grass onto my back and kind of stumble down, stopping every minute so that I could rest. It was a really challenging hike. I was amazed. All of the women in this group, they were aged maybe 15 to 50. Each one of them could pick up 4 bundles of this grass and then just bound all the way down the mountain. And I think for me that, maybe is one good example of the ways in which our biological, social, and environmental relationships can be infolded into our bodies and really substantiate well-being. I was amazed at how strong and how easily these women navigated what was an incredibly challenging task for me based on their life experiences living on Lake Victoria and doing things like this all the time. At the same time, I think ecology makes sense when we think about the unfolding of those same relationships across our environment, the way we use our agricultural space, the way we use forests, the way we produce food and then return it to our bodies. I think the line between what is our organism and what is our ecosystem actually becomes pretty blurry. And then when we think about heritage, it seems like that's that same idea, but really spread out across time. And when we think about our organism isn't just what's happening right now in time and space, but really across generations. I think that heritage really is a way of thinking about the unfolding of these relationships across generations.
Yes, I teach my children to go and pull some mabuy, chikai, and jipijapa too, to make me help me to cook it. And I send Ezekiel to go and pick some water for me, make I cook the achute. And I send him make he go get some firewood to cook the achute.
Lauritula sat squinting into the sun with the grey clay at his heels. He is a Juhai man who took me to visit a clay pit in the Korra to collect some grey clay. While visiting, sitting quietly in front of the clay, Lauri explained, when one eats clay, by which he means to paint with clay, affliction, called mutan, will end, for mutan is afraid of clay, afraid of this clay. I asked him why mutan was afraid. It's its custom. Mutan dislikes clay. When one eats clay, the mutan will say in irritation, "Ini bagad debi kyam, tamadabwe." Why have you eaten this? I'm tired. And upon saying this, it will flee to its place below the earth because it is afraid. During 12 months of fieldwork, it became clear that eating a variety of earthy substances by applying them to the body in different ways is central to the medical cultures of the community that Lauri is part of. My research set out to investigate if and how body painting plays a role in health and healing. People like Lauri provide the emic explanation that make redundant the issue of if they paint for reasons related to their health. Clearly they do. As Lauri so eloquently explains, afflictions, such as mutan, dislike clay. Mutan gets fed up with people who eat clay and flees to its place below the earth. This is why people eat clay. Lauri possessed a way of explaining things to me so that I could readily understand even complex issues. But, of course, verbal explanations, however articulate, only tell us so much. I'm sure Lauri would agree. In fact, although he was able to articulate the practice of eating earth, this is not generally how people taught me or one another about these practices. I suspect that it is no coincidence that Lauri's lesson was given at the site of an important local clay pit, with the context and substance of his lesson lying at his feet. The site and substance evoked the very lesson he gave far more effectively than my most direct questions. It is through practical and materially informed discourse that I have been able to learn and describe how eating clays makes people healthy. To explore how eating clay restores health and maintains health requires an examination of the often underexplored process and substance of body painting, rather than only the product, which has so usually been the focus of anthropological studies. To draw attention to the process of eating clay, painting with clay, requires a focus on the practice. An examination of the substances and their usage has also led me to a greater consideration of the context. By eating clay, people simultaneously engage in a relationship with and experience of the land and the environment more generally. This manifests itself in foundation myths, as well as in the mundane and therapeutic uses of clay and earth in the ritual cleansing of the land. This explanation into the process, substances, and contexts of body painting provides a lesson in ecology, to quote Viveros de Castro. This lesson shows us that health is fostered in the very ways in which the pastoral people, in this case Lauri and the people he lives with, experience their consubstantiality with the earth and with the environment. As Elizabeth Shue, 2007, notes, quote, "In many medicines, humans are considered co-substantial with the natural environment, and accordingly, as is here argued, many key terms convey culturally specific knowledge about ecological processes. A lesson on ecological processes can be learned by examining the process and context of eating earthy substances among the Mun of the community of which Lauri is a part.
The way we use and occupy and cultivate lands is that we, the Mayan peoples, are we do our farming. There is whereby we get our livelihood, like for example, like we do slash and burn mipa, and then we do matambre, the second crops of the year, and then we do there is where we collect everything that how we construct our home. So, and I believe that it is very important for us, and there is whereby we get the herbs, the medicinal plant that we have around us, and those are very important for us because it is if we notice that with the Mayan people, the medicinal plant that we have around us are important because we doesn't have to go too far if we are sick, if we have any things that we know that we can get cure from the medicinal plant that we have around us.
The relationship between ecology, embodiment, and heritage is very, very important to me at a personal level and in my research. The way in which I define these terms is, ecology refers specifically to the relationship between people and the environment. Embodiment is or refers to those messages and the information and the processes that are reflected and in our bodies. So any information that we carry with us in our physical body, that is embodiment, which means we absorb the information and it's reflected in us. And heritage, well, refers to the legacy that we leave to other generations. So how does that relate to my work? Well, my work is very interdisciplinary and complex and incorporates issues of ecology, creativity and art, holistic health, among other processes. So perhaps the issue of creativity is the one that reflects best this relationship between embodiment and ecology and heritage, in the sense that in the creative process, which starts in the mind, and some will say that it starts even deeper at a spiritual level. But let's say it starts in the mind, and then it's transferred to the outside world. So the imagination allows us to envision new forms that are then transformed through work into new material objects and transformations to the environment in general. And then these objects and these transformations are left as legacies to new generations. But this is how we transform the environment, or one way in which we transform the environment. But also, we are transformed by the environment. We are the environment, and we are affected by it at all levels, physical, spiritual, mental, emotional. At every single level, we carry the environment with us, and in that sense, we embody our environment. So this relationship between the environment and us is dialectical. We cannot have one without the other, and when we teach as teachers or elders, or when we leave these legacies reflected in the environment, then these relationships, this ecology is reflected and passed on from our generation to the next generation.